Hi, welcome to John's Gaming and Tech. Is your computer running slow? And you think, hey, let me just throw some more RAM at it? Sorry, dude. Can someone check? I think he'll be okay. So in this video, I threw together a quick test bench to show y'all maybe what your next upgrade should be. We have just a B450M Pro motherboard, nothing special, running a 2-core, 4-thread, 240G, I believe it is. I'll correct it on the screen somewhere if I'm wrong. This has an onboard APU. It's old generation. We're talking 7-8 years ago. So I wanted something that really shows, hey, you know, if I have an older computer, what should my next upgrade be? And we started out with the old brick of a hard drive. This is a Seagate 3 terabyte, 7200 on the RPM, and I don't see a read and write on here, but anyway, just your basic hard drive. And then we went from that to a NVMe SSD. You could also get the same out of a regular SSD. Yes, you're going to get better read and write speeds out of the NVMe, but a solid state drive will help out significantly too. And then we started out with your memory. Went from 4 gig to 8 gig to 16 gig. And just want to show you all what the numbers are going to look like. So stay tuned and let's get into it. So let's break into the numbers. I have my cheat sheet here and let's get started. So with just the onboard graphics, no video card, we started out with 4 gigs of RAM and the big SSD. So here we go. We have, and let me explain how I did everything real quick. So I took our Windows load time, Firestrike, Heaven, Starswarm, and Farming Simulator. So I took all the load times, frames per second, and averaged them out so that I can save a bunch of graphs on the computer. Wait, stop right there. I know it can speed up your computer right now. You don't have to change anything, and you don't even have to leave the screen. Just click the like button right there. Guaranteed your computer will speed up 1000%. I'm just kidding, but it will help me out. So click the like button. I don't want to build a bunch of graphs. Okay, so let's get started. So just the onboard graphics with no graphics card. With 4 gigs of RAM, we saw an average load time of 100.4, 8 gigs of RAM, 80, and 16 gigs of RAM, 71.6 seconds. And whenever we paired the graphics card with the motherboard, we actually saw an increase of 4 gigs of 104 seconds, 8 gigs, 80.8 seconds, 16 gigs, 75.4 seconds. Now that is due to the CPU having to send the graphics card over to render the frames. That's going to add a little bit of time. So let's move on to frames per second. So with just the onboard graphics, we saw an average frame rate of 16.69 frames per second with 4 gigs of RAM. 8 gigs of RAM was 22.21 seconds, or frame rate, sorry. And on the 16 gigs of RAM, we saw 22.31 frames per second. Jumping over to with the graphics card, we saw 4 gigs of RAM with a 89 frame rate, and 8 gigs of RAM was average of 93. 16 gigs of RAM, average of 96.25. Just for reference, let's run through the Windows load time because that was the most dramatic out of all the load times. So the Windows load time for APU only 4 gig was 262 seconds. 8 gig, 191 seconds, and 154 seconds for 16 gig, and that's with APU only. Then we pair that with the graphics card. We did see a little decrease in time with the Windows load time. We went to 205 seconds on 4 gigs of RAM, and 8 gigs of RAM, 189. 16 gigs was 188 seconds for your Windows load time. So now with the hard drive pulled out and the SSD in, we went with a MP510 from Corsair. I think I picked it up for like $67, or no, it wasn't even that much. It was $38, just a little 250 gig stick. And here we go. So with just the APU and no graphics card, just onboard graphics, we saw a average load time of 35.4 seconds with 4 gigs of memory, and 8 gigs of memory it was 16.75, and 16 gigs of memory was 38.75. And let's jump down to after we had the graphics card, we saw a load time of 29.4 with 4 gigs of memory, 29.8 with 8 gigs of memory, and 29.6 with 16 gigs of memory. So dramatic change. Let's look at the Windows load time, because that's where we really made a difference. We saw 24 seconds of load time across the board with 4, 8, or 16 gigs of memory with just the APU. And we did increase that to 28 seconds when we added the graphics card. Same thing with 4 gigs, 8 gigs, and 16 gigs. So let's jump over to our FPS that we saw when adding the SSD. So FPS with the SSD and just the APU, we saw an average of, with 4 gigs of memory, 16.55 frames a second, 8 gigs of memory, 19.34 frames a second, and a 21.76 frames a second on 16 gig. Now when we paired that with the 2080, we saw an average of 91.47 with 4 gigs of memory, 94.94 with 8 gigs of memory, and 92.49 with 16 gigs of memory. All that is within just a couple frames of each other, so real steady across the board. So looking at our frame rate, when we went from a hard drive to an SSD, we saw very, very minimal 1 or 2 frame increase going from hard drive to SSD with the onboard graphics. With the GPU, we saw a same thing. We saw just a minimal 4 to 5 average frames per second increase when we paired it that way. So what should you do? I can't tell you what you should do, but I can tell you what I recommend. First thing to go, get rid of your big hard drive. Well, don't get rid of it. Save it. This is great for storage. Switch over to a solid state drive or a NVMe style SSD. Make sure that your motherboard will support this. Not all motherboards have a slot for this. Plenty of videos out there showing you and pictures showing you how to check to make sure that it will support this. Most all of them should. This is the same plug that goes in your hard drive, so it will support this. So what I recommend, first and foremost, if you do not have an SSD in your system, add one. You can get these SSDs. I want to say this is 120 gig PNY, just a cheap one, and it cost me, I want to say right around $25, $30. So you can get them really cheap. If nothing, you can put your operating system on it, and then all of your games you can store on this. So that will increase your load time for your games, but it will decrease your load time for all your operating system, anything you have on the operating, so your Windows, if you're running anything just off of Windows, it'll speed up. Then I would look at RAM. So memory, RAM. So if you're running anything less than 16 gig, I would say less than 8 gigs, upgrade your RAM. I think the norm for gaming right now is right around 16 gigs, 8 to 16. A lot of games are requiring more around 16. So upgrade your memory next. And then I would look at things like your CPU, your graphics card. If you're running on onboard APU, you can definitely jump up to a graphics card. We did see on average about from 4 frames, or from 4 gigs to up to going up to 16 gigs. We saw about 15 frame increase on games like Farming Simulator and a couple other ones I played just to try out. So you can increase your memory to get your frame rate up. Right now, graphics cards, don't pay scalper prices unless you absolutely need one. Graphics card, if you're not running a graphics card, I would look at that next. Great beginner graphics card. You can get something like a 1660. You should be able to run 1080 on most of your games, high settings, and still see 60 to 70 frames, no problem. And then your CPU. So this CPU, once again, is very old. I want to say I paid like $50 for this thing 2 years ago. I use it in a FreeNAS setup. You don't have to go something as crazy as a Ryzen 9 either. So a lot of it depends on what you're doing. I've been running a Ryzen 5 5600 in my editing rig, paired with the EVGA graphics card, which does have an encoder in it. So that does help speed up like my as far as video editing and streams and stuff. I did notice that I am maxing out. I added a camera to my stream, maxing out the Ryzen 5, so I jumped up to a Ryzen 9. If you're doing streaming and you want an all-in-one system, I would recommend at least a Ryzen 5, one of the maybe like Ryzen 5 3600, or even jumping up to the 5600X and whatnot. So anyway, I hope this video helped you out. Once again, first thing to upgrade your hard drive if you find yourself with really slow load times. I picked up this 1 gig Samsung 980, not the 980 Evo, just standard 980. It was like $105 and it's 1 terabyte. There are videos, if you decide to go that route, that you can go online and you can actually clone your hard drive, Windows and all, to an SSD. Makes it real simple. You can take everything from one to another, then you can unplug your hard drive, plug in your SSD, clear out your hard drive, your big monster hard drive, spinning disk, and use it for storage. I will put a link down below to a video I recommend watching for that. And if this video helped you out in any way, like, subscribe, and watch out for the next one. Click the bell icon and you'll see the next one. But that'll do it for me. Have a good day. Hope this helped y'all.